when you know you've got a leadership contest ending, I think it would be very difficult to change the rules. Obviously, it's with the Conservative Party board in our constitution, so they can absolutely make that decision. I think the thing to do probably is to have the contest, have the debates, get somebody in place, and then actually that is the moment when you haven't got, sort of self-interested candidates and people waiting for that contest to then think, actually, how do we do this? And I think one of the suggestions is to have different rules when you're in opposition than when you're in government. And that does seem sort of eminently sensible as a suggestion.
Nikki, the story clearly is Labour landslide and what Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, and the new government does with that. The other bit of this is the Conservative Party and their, leadership contest. Rishi Sunak says he'll hold on as leader for as long as the sort of process requires, I suppose. But then there will be jostling. There will be another contest. And I just wonder how fearful that makes you, because the leadership challenges of the Conservatives over the last few years have been really damaging for the party. I wonder if this one, given it's in opposition, will be any calmer and actually more productive in some ways for the Conservatives.
Well, I know what you mean. I mean, look, I hope so. And I think that probably the thing that you can do in opposition is probably have a proper debate about both what went wrong, but also where you want to go, in a way that it's very difficult when you're in government. Firstly, because often the leadership contenders when you're in government are themselves senior ministers that are trying to run departments at the same time as running leadership campaigns. But also it's very difficult, obviously, and depends on the circumstances of the leadership contest. But they've always been, fairly unhappy over the last few years. I mean, normally when a leader or prime minister stands down, it's not usually happy circumstances, and that brings its own problems. And I mean, I think it's up to the leadership contenders for the Conservative Party, really. And I would hope that they would, yes, you can have a good debate, but you can do it in a respectful way. I mean, there's only 121 Conservative MPs who are going to be the first part of the leadership process. And again, 121 people can show both respect, but also the need for a good debate, but also, doing it without having to attract, massive difficult headlines for the rest of the party. And I think if they manage to do that, that would send a good signal to the members in the country as well. I mean, I think we also have to accept that, rightly so, that the focus will be on the new government. Yeah. And I think that probably it's going to come as a real shock to a number of Conservatives. I remember talking to a very senior former Conservative MP, lost their seat on Thursday night, who was talking about time in opposition. And he said, what people don't realise is that nobody's interested in you. And that's not entirely true.
Sure.
But the focus is the focus will be on the new government, and the Conservative Party should merrily, sort of hopefully shuffle off stage left or right or whatever, and get on with thinking about itself and what went wrong. Until maybe sort of the autumn, where we'll have to see how long the contest is going to take, and I hope that Rishi Sunak will stay in place. I think he said he will until that is decided.
As long as they don't shuffle off far right, Nikki?
Indeed. Yes, exactly. Yes, very good.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's on very little sleep as well. Jack, I must ask you about the situation in Scotland, because there are two sort of opposing things here that I want to put to you. The first is that without the result in Scotland, in terms of votes, this is from John Curtis, in terms of votes, without the result in Scotland, we'd actually largely be talking about the Labour Party in a similar context to 2019. But there is also the part of this that that Labour would have beaten the Tories without winning any seats in Scotland. So bear with, it's the vote numbers versus seat numbers here is the comparison. And that's interesting in and of itself, because that's kind of what the SNP were portraying in the campaign. I mean, it doesn't really seem to have benefited the SNP in any way at all. They've been reduced to single digits. How does this chapter for Labour in Scotland, how does it need to play out? As a former Labour First Minister, what is the significance of this?
Well, I thought it was a really, really interesting election campaign in Scotland. The Scottish electorate over the last decade, perhaps even more so at times than the electorate in England, over the past decade, has seemed to be not linking their votes to the performance of government as they see it in their everyday lives. So voting driven by identity, driven by emotion, passion for another cause. And I thought in this election campaign there was a real shift on two levels. One was amongst the general population holding the government in Edinburgh to account, as well as the government in London, and that is a big shift in the rationale that people have behind the decisions to vote. And the second thing was there was a real marked shift in young people. The Scottish Labour Party and the Labour Party generally have seemed to young Scots to be largely irrelevant for the last 15 years. And what we definitely saw, and it was really quite remarkable, was a dramatic increase in the number of young activists out actually working for the Labour Party during the campaign, but young voters deciding to go with Labour this time round in a way that has just not been the case for the last 15 years. So I think those changes are interesting. What now needs to happen is that group of Scottish Labour MPs need to they obviously need to become great advocates for the Labour Party in Scotland, but they particularly need to be great advocates for Scotland in Westminster. Because I think, first of all, we will need that because as a country we've got issues and we need to be well represented, but also they need to be seen to represent that collective Scottish interest as well as their own individual constituencies and the wider Labour interest. And if they can do that, then they can build on this result, and the SNP will be in trouble, which, from my perspective, I would say they deserve, given their performance in government in Edinburgh over the last decade or so.
Nikki, we're horribly late, but I want to ask you one question before we go. Do you think now is the time for Rishi Sunak to change the rules, to say, actually, it's no longer the members that choose the next leader of the Conservative Party, it needs to be the Parliamentary Party, in light of what has gone before?
Perhaps in an ideal world, I just don't think it's possible. I don't think it would be possible to change that. When you know you've got a leadership contest ending, I think it would be very difficult to change the rules. Obviously, it's with the Conservative Party board in our constitution, so they can absolutely make that decision. I think the thing to do probably is to have the contest, have the debates, get somebody in place, and then actually that is the moment when you haven't got, sort of self-interested candidates and people waiting for that contest to then think, actually, how do we do this? And I think one of the suggestions is to have different rules when you're in opposition than when you're in government. And that does seem sort of eminently sensible as a suggestion.
Really good to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much. We'll speak to you again on Friday. We'll get back to normal. We won't be so discombobulated
Yes,
doing it on
absolutely.
Saturday. Thank you both
Thank
so
you both.
much.
Take care.
Take care.
Sleep well.
Baroness Morgan, Nikki Morgan there, former Conservative Education Secretary, and of course heard from Lord McConnell, Jack McConnell, former First Minister of Scotland.